Now the slide that I'm showing is for illustration purposes. You can see that I took a snapshot where I had multiple profiles configured. So it's neat. Hey there, you're still with me. This is part 4 of the never-ending Stellarium mount control videos. In this video, I want to talk about the preliminary steps that we need to take inside the Stellarium software. So there's a plugin that needs to be activated, and that's a one-time only thing. We need to build a mount configuration. This gets into some technical things here, but in general, that's a one-time only thing to set that up. If you have more than one mount that you want to use with Stellarium, then you might repeat those steps. I'll do a couple of examples just to show you the process, and also to emphasize a unique feature of Stellarium that nobody's talking about. So here we go. Wait, I'm assuming that we've got our stuff cabled up. We've got our good working connection of some kind, either a direct physical cable serial connection, or we have a working Wi-Fi link, that we've previously downloaded all the software that we need. I had talked about in part 2, which was optional for some people, the ASCOM or the Indie software. So I've downloaded the ASCOM platform and the ASCOM mount driver. And if you look at my Windows 10 screen, you can see it. You can see that there's ASCOM stuff here. In particular, a diagnostics tool. That's good for checking things. You can see I've got the Stellarium software downloaded and installed. It's ready to go. And specifically, I downloaded the 32-bit version, so it's compatible with the mount driver 32-bit version. I've got some other stuff here, but we can ignore that. You can see I have Stellarium Scope. I'm not using that. I was just trying it out and testing it. I had never used it before. So again, basically what we have to do is start up Stellarium, activate the plugin, build a mount profile, and specify the technical details of that. And that will allow us to then theoretically connect and slew around. So that's a big checklist, but we're going to focus on the profile and the mount software and getting that set up. I'm assuming you've done this already, but if not, you can go ahead and do this now. Pause the video, but I've got the Stellarium software already downloaded. So stellarium.org, if you're not familiar with it, and you can see that there are versions for the platforms Linux, Mac, and Windows. So you want to download the appropriate one. I'm not talking about the web version, and I'm not talking about the mobile product here. So we're using the full computer software for this discussion. And you can see for Windows, there's 32-bit and 64-bit. So you need to be aware of, if you're using ASCOM, any sort of driver restrictions there. I have a 32-bit mount driver, so I need to use the 32-bit version of Stellarium. So I've previously downloaded it, installed it. It's working fine. In fact, I've used it and configured it a little bit, so it's working okay. While I'm here, I just want to draw your attention to, I know people don't like reading the manual, but there's the user guide, and there's lots of information there. I learned things from that. Just yesterday, I learned some new keyboard shortcuts that I didn't know. It's a big manual. Yeah, I think it's over 300 pages long, so that's a bit intimidating, but just pay attention to the table of contents or to the index and read the relevant information that pertains to you. So let's switch over to my laptop computer, and I'm just going to start up Stellarium now. So I've got the icon on my desktop. I'm going to launch that. I have a whole video on how to download Stellarium, install it on the Windows platform. If the user access control comes up, how to deal with that. So you can check out my video on the detailed video on installation on the Windows platform. So I'm just waiting for it to launch. I've loaded an additional star catalog, so that adds a bit of time. I've got a number of plugins that are active. That's adding some overhead here. It's taking a little while to start up on my computer. Stellarium is getting bigger and bigger over time. It used to be a small, tiny program, but it's becoming pretty robust here. Oh yeah, I loaded the Quasars plugin recently. I like looking at Quasars. So here we are. My Stellarium is up and running. I can't run it full screen on this computer for compatibility reasons. You can see I've turned off the constellations, the star names. I like that realistic view. So usual stuff. We'll just flip on the constellations for now and the stars here just to give us our bearings. But the next thing that we need to do now is review our plugins. And in particular, we need to make sure that the telescope control plugin is active. So here's what we need to do. If you've been following along all my video segments, you maybe did this in part 1, because I had suggested this as a means of sort of exploring and doing research and determining what's possible in your configuration. But I don't have it active right now on my computer. So let's have a look at my Stellarium again. So what's the process? Go to your left menu and look for the wrench or the spanner and click on the configuration button. This will open up our configuration window. Lots of tabs here, of course. If you have a slightly older version of Stellarium, the tabs might be a bit different in some of the content, but that's fine. Head over to the plugins tab. Here's our alphabetic listing of plugins. You may have to scroll down before you see the ones near the bottom. And we're looking for telescope control. So I've chosen it, some details about it up at the top here, but I see that it's not ready to be used. And in particular, I can't click on the configure button. It's not available yet. It has to be loaded. I'm assuming that it's loaded for us to proceed. So if it's the same for you as me, we have to turn on the load at startup option, close this configuration window, and then shut down the software. Wait a couple of seconds and then start up Stellarium again. But now you've made Stellarium load that plugin for the future. That's a one-time only thing. You only need to do that once. That's sort of automatically active now going forwards. While we're waiting, by the way, I'm a little picky about the wording here. Sorry, I get kind of riled up about this, but we're really not controlling a telescope. The telescope, I consider the optical tube assembly, and you don't control that with a computer per se. It's just the lenses and the mirrors and stuff like that. It's mount control that we're doing. And some people have one mount and several telescopes, or they take their telescope off of their mount and they put their camera on top of it. So it's the mount that we're controlling, not the instrument that's on top of that. So again, I'm picky about the wording. Now, if you were to go through the same path, you don't have to do this, but if you go into configuration and plugins and you go to telescope control, now the configure button is available. And we want to get to the configuration screen. So that's one way to do it. But let me backtrack out of that. I'll close everything. Now that you've added the telescope control into Stellarium, look in your horizontal toolbar and look over near the time controls on the right-hand side. And you should see now that there's a new button that's there. And this is the telescope control button. It's a little tiny telescope with a reticule beside it. This is not to be confused with the telescope button that's normally in your horizontal toolbar, and that's the equatorial azimuthal mode button. That just flips the angle of the sky based on the type of mount that you have with your telescope. It doesn't drive the mount. It's just a visual option for changing the appearance of the screen. So it's not that button, it's the telescope control with the reticule. When you point to it, it's called move a telescope to a given set of blah, blah, blah. It's a bit wordy, but I just call that the move telescope or the slew button. So if you click on that, it brings up the slew telescope box, but it's empty right now for obvious reasons. We have not configured anything at this stage, or if we have things configured, they're not turned on or they're not active. So what we want to do is configure. So here's another way to get to the configure screen. And I think if you count the clicks, this is a little bit faster. So here we are now at the telescope screen. The slew box in the background, I'm going to get rid of that just to keep the screen simple and uncluttered, not too busy. So here's the telescope window at this stage. I don't like the wording of this. I wish it said mounts or mount profiles. That's what we're configuring here. Now the slide that I'm showing is for illustration purposes. You can see that I took a snapshot where I had multiple profiles configured. So it's neat when you think about it. If you have a couple of different mounts, when I go up to the Club Observatory, I use the Nexstar 11. So I have the N11 GPS noted. I built a profile for testing my friend's Losmandy Gemini 1 control system with the custom cable. So I've got that profile there. And you can see I took a snapshot when I did add my Super Polaris Go-To system where I had to use an ASCOM solution. Notice the type information tells you if it's directly controlled inside Stellarium or if you're using an external third-party tool or component. And you'll see local versus external here. And I've also created a simulator just for testing purposes. So there's different things, and notice the status, it might read as disconnected or stopped. So there's some different wording there. But it's interesting to note that you can add multiple profiles. Keep that in mind. I'll come back to that. It's a subtle issue there. But now we're ready to manage our telescope or mount profiles. We can add new ones, we can edit them, we can delete them. And obviously when we've got one set up and working correctly, we're going to connect. We'll do that in the next video, but we need to at least build the profile here. We'll worry about the connecting bit later. So now let's go through the process of building a new mount profile. There's a new button here, and I'm using the latest version of Stellarium where they made that iconic. If you're using a slightly older version of Stellarium, it's going to say add telescope. Doesn't matter what the button looks like, but I want you to add a new profile now. So I'm going to, back in my Stellarium now where I have nothing, I'm going to click the plus button here. And just waiting a moment for it to pop up. It's actually scanning the environment here, and now I'm in the add new telescope, add new mount screen. So here's our next screen that we want to look at. So this was what I talked about way back in part 1 of this video series, that if you want to drive your telescope directly from Stellarium using built-in support or drivers, and you've got a serial connection, you just head down to device settings and you choose your appropriate mount or a compatible mount. So that's good. And then you make sure your communication port is right. So I'm going to go through that process. I'm going to pretend that I have a Nexstar 11 or a Nexstar special edition, an SE. So Stellarium, I'm going to choose Nexstar. Oh, it's already there. And I'll choose my COM port. And there's a COM port menu. And you can see that I have 2, COM 3, COM 6. The COM port that you're interested in is the one that you looked up in the device manager in Windows. So remember when we connect our USB serial device, we talked about that in the previous video when connecting our cables, that a COM port assignment is made by Windows, and that needs to match right now. Now when I did this before, I was assigned COM 6 for my USB serial port. So I saw it was already there, but it could change from time to time. So I might have to choose the different one. I'm just playing here, so I'm going to choose a different one. If you're on Linux or Mac, I think you just look in the menu and you're going to see communication devices. And you'll see one that has an obvious name with USB serial in the name. Now, on the Mac or the Linux environment, there are USB serial devices that have TTY or CU designated. The TTY is for teletype. That's for a listening device. You don't want to use that. You want to use CU, the call up device, for proper two-way communications. So look in your serial menu and choose the relevant device. In Windows, you got to have the right COM number. On the Mac or Linux, choose the USB, the .cu.USB serial device. Use that. Down at the bottom of this box, there's user interface stuff. This is optional. You can have extra circles drawn on the screen if you want. Moving back near the top to the telescope properties, we've got some stuff to do here. The connection delay defaults to a ½ second. You may need to change that for your mount. So that's something I don't know what to suggest there exactly, but you may need to change those values, allow more time or less time for the connection delay. So that's probably something to do with your mount documentation. You might find some information there, or your user community on a groups IO or in a forum, they might recommend a value there. Your mount may require the coordinate system be used as current. So Equinox now, J now. Most mounts use J2000. But again, that's a mount specific thing. I can't tell you what you should use. Your mount software will tell you that. So you need to be aware of that and use the right one. Connection at startup is optional. I'm not going to use it. I would recommend you don't use it initially. But if you're building a robotic system, you have an observatory, you just want to go out there, turn on the power, go back inside, and the telescope starts up and everything automatically connects and so on, then you would want to use this. You'd be compelled to use the automatic startup. So Stellarium would start up and then it would try to connect to the mount right away. On permanent setups, that's not a bad idea. In a robotic telescope environment, that's not a bad idea. But if you have a mobile rig, if you use it in different locations, if you're connecting and disconnecting your USB devices, remember in Windows the COM port can change. So you may not be able to do this because it might not connect if the port information is changing. I would also recommend that you not use this until you've completed commissioning. In my final video in part 6, I'm going to talk about cautions and warnings and that you should go through a commissioning phase before you use that. So for now, I'm not going to use that. I think that's a bit dangerous, actually. But let's give this a good name. And it's not your telescope. It's not the C8. I have the Nexstar 11. So that's an integrated mount fork system. So that's a good name for that. Short and sweet is better. Short name if you can, but refer to the mount here. If you got a couple of different mounts, you could say NEQ5 Pro or P. That's good. Some sort of short and sweet identifier like that, and name it for the mount, even though this is called Add New Telescope. So does that make sense? I'm simulating that I'm doing direct support inside Stellarium because I'm using a Nexstar. Oh, I just did a SynScan there, so let me change that. There's a better example. So I'm assuming I have a SynScan hooked up to a Skywatcher mount. Oops, I accidentally changed that. I'm sorry. So I've got an NEQ5 Pro Skywatcher mount. It's got a SynScan hand controller. I've figured out that it's on COM3 in this example. I gave it a good name, so I'm done. I'm gonna hit OK. So there's an example of a completed telescope profile. The Stellarium means it's driven internally. There's our nice little short name. That's good. If you want to add a simulator for fun, this is good for testing purposes, just demonstrations here. I'm just going to call it sim. So I just chose nothing and I gave it the name sim. That's it, done. I'm going to hit OK there. there's a couple. So there's an example of a telescope mount profile setup where you've got more than one rig. You might have a couple of mounts. But now I'm going to do my official one. And mine is an ASCOM pathway that I have to go. So the snapshot that I'm showing you here is a basic one where we're doing direct internal support using one of the built-in drivers. And we talked about that a long time ago, way at the beginning. On the Mac, here's what we would see if we're going to directly connect our mount to our Macintosh. Maybe we have a USB serial adapter and we have a SynScan hand controller. So I'm saying direct support. There's the SynScan. Oh, there's the device. There's the communication port. It's device/CU call up dot USB serial. Doesn't matter what the rest of the number is. Well, that would only matter if you had two USB serial devices hooked up at the same time. You'd want the right one. So you'd have to do a bit of digging to figure that out. But there's an example where we've got a SynScan Skywatcher setup. And now I'm going to do my ASCOM one. So here we go. I'm going to go through all the steps. I'm going to add a new mount. I have an ASCOM solution. ASCOM is here is because I previously installed the ASCOM software. If you don't have the ASCOM software installed, it won't be listed. You won't be able to choose it. So in terms of a sequence, you install the ASCOM platform, your mount driver, test it if you need to, and then start up Stellarium, and it will detect the presence of the ASCOM software. Now I'm going to go down to my telescope device settings. Oh, it looks different here. It's showing ASCOM settings. Choose the ASCOM telescope, even it's not worded here right. It's ASCOM mount that I'm trying to choose. So I'm going to hit that button. I am not in Stellarium anymore. I have shifted into the ASCOM environment. You can see a reference to Alpaca. This is a telescope, should be called telescope mount chooser. So I'm going to choose this menu, and here's some different mounts. And you might have several devices installed in your ASCOM environment or several mounts. But there's the Sky Sensor 2000 PC V6 driver that is technically for a Vixen device, but is compatible with my weird idea GoToStar hand controller. So I'm going to choose that. So that's done. Now there was no COM port selection inside the ASCOM. It's done either in the ASCOM handler or it's done in your source software. If you're using the new Celestron PWI, the Celestron plane wave instruments, you set the COM port over there. So one place somewhere you got to do it. In my case, I'm going to go into properties. Here are the properties for the ASCOM Vixen SS2K driver. Lots of stuff here, but I'm interested in communication. Ooh, wrong port number. When I hooked up my USB serial device, it was assigned COM port 6. So there's all 16. I have to choose the right one. It didn't give me a short list. It didn't auto select it. So I got to know what's going on here. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I've chosen the right mount driver, and I told it the communication pathway. I'm going to hit OK, and I get good feedback. I wish they showed the port number here. That would be nice. It would allow us to do a quick diagnostic, but it is what it is. I'm not going to bother with user interface stuff. I'm going to roll back to the top. I don't need to change the coordinate system or the delay in my case, but I'm going to give it a good name now. This is really the GoToStar system that I'm controlling. It's not the Vixen mount per se, that's just the hardware. I have a control system that's doing the work. So that's the GoToStar. So I'm just picky about my names there. I'm going to hit OK. And now I see something good here, that it's being managed locally as opposed to a remote connection. I'm using ASCOM technology to make it work. There's my device. And notice all these profiles here have numbers beside them. So that comes into play in a moment here. So if you've got 2, 3, 4 mounts, you might have quite a few here. That profile business, setting it up is a one-time only thing, but you may need to edit them if the COM port's changed. That's what the spanner of the gear is. So if you had to go through and edit one of your profiles because a COM port changed, that's what you do. You don't have to build it again. I'm going to back up in my presentation here for a second, just to emphasize a point. You get it? Do you realize what's going on? If you have more than one mount profile and you hook up multiple devices to your computer, you could drive them all simultaneously. You get it? You could use Stellarium, one workstation, Stellarium running, and you could drive 2 or 3 mounts. It's kind of crazy, but maybe you have a star party going on and you want to have 2 different subjects, and maybe you've got 2 telescopes. Maybe you got a wide field refractor and you got a long focal length SCT. So you want to have different views, one of a planet and one of a nebula. So you could have 2 scopes pointed at different parts of the sky, and you're turning them, each one independently of one another. So that's cool. A lot of people don't talk about this or know about this, that you can operate multiple telescopes at the same time. That might be personal, that you have a visual scope and you're doing photography at the same time, or you're doing 2 photography ones. One is wide field, one's long focal length. So that's sort of neat. But I draw attention to this. If you have multiple profiles here, you have to pay attention to the number. And we'll come back to that when we do our connections and stuff like that. So I wanted to go through a couple of profiles. There's an example of a Celestron. That's easy. There's an example from the Mac. And we choose our serial port, and the example is a SynScan Skywatcher. Here's an example of ASCOM, a few more steps, but good profile set up, ready to go. Okay, to recap, in part 4, we did preliminary work in Stellarium, one-time only procedures. We activated the telescope control plugin, and we built a mount profile. You might build multiple mount profiles, but when you build one, you're considering the method, the overall method by which you're connecting. You're trying to make sure you use the right driver. You need to use the right communication channel. You need to give it a good name. There might be other settings that you need to take care of. This concludes part 4. We're going to head to part 5 next, and this is the exciting bit. This is where we tell the mount to move to a new location. So I'll see you in part 5. Ciao.